This podcast is brought to you by PLI, the Practicing Law Institute, committed to providing essential legal resources to the law school community. For more information, visit pli.edu/law school.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anastasia Boyko, and I am the host of PLI's How to Navigate Law School podcast. How to Navigate Law School is your podcast guide to unlocking the hidden knowledge and practical skills needed to succeed in law school. We connect students with valuable insights from experienced professionals, decompress law school's unwritten rules, and create a supportive community empowering students to confidently create their future. Hello, and welcome to PLI's How to Navigate Law School podcast. I am your host, Anastasia Boyko, and today I am joined by my friend in innovation, Nick Hafen.
Thanks, Anastasia. Happy to be here.
Love having you here. Nick, you lead legal technology at BYU Law School. Would you mind sharing your background with our audience?
Sure. I went to law school at BYU, and a lot of the initiatives that I work on now actually started when I was a student, and so we're going to talk about some more specifics there later, but that was kind of my introduction to legal technology. After law school, I went to a big firm in Chicago, Kirkland Ellis, for about 3 years. And then I left to start my own law firm and try and do some more tech and innovation related things. And I did that for about a year before I started this job. And so in this job, I teach a lot of technology classes, do technology training, AI related, innovation related. But yeah, that's kind of my background.
Amazing. So you and I connected when I was running innovation at the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah. We were somewhat partners in innovation in the state of Utah, and we've had the good fortune of being on innovation committees together. And a lot of our work has focused on how innovation and legal technology can facilitate the aims of access to justice. And so in furtherance of that, I would love to hear about the LawX program at BYU.
Yeah, so the LawX program is one of the ones that started when I was a student, and I actually got to be in the very first LawX class. And I think that's probably a pretty good example of how the program works. So we decided we wanted to do something about the high default rate in debt collection lawsuits. When people are sued over a debt, most of them don't respond to the case, and so they get a default judgment, they automatically lose, their wages get garnished, their life gets worse because they didn't engage with the lawsuit. And so we built a tool called Solo Suit that would help people create an answer to file with the court so that they could engage with the lawsuit. And that went on. One of the students in our class, George Simons, took that, created a startup, went through Y Combinator, and it's still operating today. And so a lot of the LawX projects are like that. We see some access to justice issue in the legal field, and then the students using design thinking principles, craft a solution to that problem, talking to all the different stakeholders involved and create something that will, help make legal services more accessible, will make legal services better, faster, cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of my first introductions to the program. I was able to come and see the presentations and the competition for some of the students who had put together projects. And what struck me was just how impactful it felt. I find that going to law school can feel a bit discouraging after you start. You might have a sense that law is a tool of change before you go to law school. And then you learn how difficult of a process change making really is. And I find that many of these technology tools, especially in conjunction with the sandbox that exists in Utah, offer students a way to dream about different kinds of solutions for the justice gaps that exist. So would you mind telling us a little bit more about some of the other kinds of projects that the students have come up with over the years?
Yeah, one of my favorite ones to talk about is the expungement project. And this is after I was a student and before I came back. But they wanted to do something about expungement and thought, well, maybe we'll build an app to help people figure out, am I eligible for expungement or to apply for expungement? But they discovered, because we do this design thinking process, talking to the different stakeholders, the point is to not build a solution in search of a problem. And so in talking to people, they discovered that even after people's records were expunged, those records still would often show up in background checks for a job or for an apartment or something. And they investigated further and found out that that's because the background check vendors, the companies, were not always updating their records to reflect the expungement in the court records. And so instead of building an app, they did a very lawyerly thing. They wrote a memo to the Utah Supreme Court recommending contractual changes with the vendors and did a presentation to the court, and the court adopted that. And so in the space of a semester with no coding, they were able to make a pretty significant impact. That's one of my favorites to share because there's no technology involved. It is often kind of a build an app class, but I don't want it to be just that, right? And so I like sharing that example.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like design thinking doesn't get its due credit. A lot of the problems that we see as lawyers, as legal educators, are oftentimes systems problems and communication problems. And in a complex sort of matrixed environment, a lot of different nodes don't talk to each other, right? So they may not even be aware of bottlenecks that are happening or impacts on certain individuals because that's just not part of the life cycle that they're involved in. Right. And I think it's important for students to be able to see those as very impactful points of change beyond just technology.
I agree. I think it's increasingly important with AI, that systems thinking, understanding, the problem, starting with the problem, not just, this is the emotion or this is the document that I need and that's what I'm going to focus on. Understanding why somebody needs that and how a lawyer, a law firm, legal aid, a legal tech company, like how they deliver that work product using humans for the things humans are good at, machines for the things they're good at, and orchestrating, that legal product, the solution from start to finish, and not just being narrowly focused on the one part that they do.
Yeah. Tell me more about some of the other technology initiatives that you have going on at BYU.
Our legal tech initiative is a tech training series that we do. It's weekly workshops, lunch and learn style. They start with, the basics like Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. But we use Clio and NetDocuments to help students get a sense of practice management and document management systems. We do e-discovery. We do a few sessions on AI and automation and try and get students the basics they need to not, show up in headlines for not knowing how to redact properly, but also to give them an edge in the marketplace too.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the approach that BYU has taken, where you have a real connective tissue between information services and the library and technology and AI courses. Yeah. I think oftentimes law schools have resources, but they sit in a specific department and they're not always as embedded or interconnected with the school's other initiatives. So law students are able to see more appropriately, right, how information services fits into this. So we had Greg Lambert and his team at Jackson Walker come and join us last season and talk about the importance of library services, research librarians, as you begin to understand how to navigate all of the resources as a lawyer that you have to learn, right? And the architecture and the indexing and where it all fits into the problem solving that you take on. So I love that the law school has architected this in such a way and that you end up being a bridge between those technology and access to justice classes as well as library services.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say how little I understood about the library and how it worked when I was a student. And so I have discovered, since having this job, that librarians do a lot of that connective tissue. And it's really fun to be in this position where I work with the law faculty, the library faculty, information services, and try and bridge those gaps.
Yeah. And you end up in many ways the node for students to interact with innovation. Are you finding ways to be able to connect them with other resources outside of your law school that exist on a national basis if they're coming to you and asking questions about access to justice or questions about AI? I know that you're really plugged into the ecosystem. So how have you been able to get them more nationally connected?
Yeah, we've had students get tech jobs, which is fun. A student in my AI class went on to get a job in Utah's new, I don't know how long you can say new, Office of AI Policy. Just knowing people in this space, I've been able to connect students. I've had students at other schools reach out. And so it's really gratifying to be able to connect them with people who may be, more specialized in that area than I am.
Yeah, and I also learned about the Academies project from former Dean Smith.
Oh, yeah.
I know that you're working with that. Share with our audience about that work. I think it's a great way to connect students with private sector work.
Yeah, the academies are a really cool program. I think it started towards the end of when I was in law school, and it's grown since then. So at the end of students' first year of law school, they can participate in one of these academies. They're roughly a week long, and they're kind of like boot camps in a particular practice area. So there's deals, immigration, trial litigation, appellate litigation, and they're supposed to be very practice-based. A lot of them will have a mock trial or mock negotiation or something. Last year and this year was able to do one on AI law and policy, which has been a lot of fun. Last year it was just in Salt Lake. This year we were able to do part of it in Washington, D.C. and part in Salt Lake. And it's been really fun getting them using AI in different ways. Maybe there aren't a ton of ways your first year, as many ways to use AI, but getting them hands-on to use it and try new things, and also learning about the law related to AI and legislation and policy. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's so crucial, right? Because it's such a hot topic, but until you get in the weeds and sort of see the nuances and see what part of it is interesting for you, you don't really get the full breadth of it. And you and I both know, being involved in innovation efforts with practicing attorneys, there is a large spectrum of facility and understanding and, competence. I'm curious, given all of your work with innovation in the bar, how you're able to feed that into a feedback loop with your students as they're beginning to set a mindset of technology competence and in the way that they enter the profession.
Yeah, and maybe one of the ways I think about it is in the innovation work that you and I have done, there's sometimes opposition from certain sectors of the legal industry, or sometimes more general lack of understanding that leads to opposition. And so in the LawX class, I always do a lecture on the ethics of innovation, of legal innovation, looking at the rules of professional conduct. What are they for? Usually the justification is to protect consumers. And what is the actual effect, right? Because any regulation is a limit on supply. And sometimes that's okay. We need the safety trade-off. But sometimes I think the trade-off is not worth it. And so the way I think about this is I'm trying to get them before they become, entrenched and, want to protect their little area, their little corner of the legal industry by regulating maybe more than is in the best interest of consumers.
Yeah, and it's a balance. And for those listeners who aren't familiar, do you mind giving a quick overview of the Utah Regulatory Sandbox project?
Yeah, so this started, 5-6 years ago, but this is a way for people to experiment. It's really a learning experiment. So there are some rules of professional conduct, like around law firm ownership. Only lawyers can own law firms. And also, only lawyers can engage in particular conduct. And so the sandbox allows a company to come in and say, we would like to do things differently in a way that would normally violate the rules. Whether it's having non-law firm ownership or having software, AI that performs certain services, or having paralegals perform certain services that they wouldn't normally be able to. They can come in and get authorization. It allows the bar, the Utah Supreme Court, to go slower and to learn from, these specific experiences before writing a broadly applicable rule that's, making a more permanent change. And so it's been a lot of fun to learn from all these different experiments.
What's been illuminating for me in our work with the bar is just how hard this kind of innovation really is. Regulatory reform is challenging because there are so many invested stakeholders and so many different pieces that interconnect that you wouldn't even think interconnect. When you might have an idea of, I'd love to be able to help more people put together estate planning documents. Okay, well, where do you start? Which courts does that touch? Where do you help support the safety of the consumer? What kind of oversight do you have in that regulatory process? Which is part of law school, right? Is understanding how these laws and systems interact and figuring out where you can help people the most, but also help protect them and their interests in a way that guards the rule of law and guards the way the operating system is. A lot of states have followed Utah, both in our licensed paralegal practitioner program and our sandbox, including Arizona and Colorado and Washington. Have you been involved in some of those discussions with other states as some of their committees are thinking about this?
Yeah, we've met with a few people, I think, on the Washington and maybe Minnesota experiments as well. I've talked with people in Arizona, and it's that experimentation just on a larger scale, right? It's been helpful in Utah to see our experiments in the sandbox, but it's also been helpful to look at Arizona and see, what happens? Does the world end if you just change Rule 5.4? And seeing the different ways that people are going about this. Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. I'm curious how the attitudes of students have changed around AI over the last 3 years.
Yeah, it's, I wish I had a better understanding of it. I guess I'm always trying to get more information about this, especially because I tend to interact more with students who are pro, AI. I try and get a broad cross section in my classes. I think people more and more see the opportunity. It's harder and harder to say this is going to go away. This is Bitcoin or crypto, right? It's harder to ignore, and I think students recognize that. And so, in my classes in the academy, I've had students that say, "I'm not really tech savvy, but I think this is going to be important and make a difference." And so, it's been really good to see that. I think there's and often that comes with healthy skepticism about AI. And I try and address the unhealthy skepticism in my classes and training. But it's also been really great to get them experimenting. We try and do as much hands-on stuff as possible in the classes and trainings, so that it's I don't know. CLEs are not known for being super high quality because usually it's just somebody talking at you for an hour. And so I try and get away from that. And students have really appreciated getting into the tools and actually doing things instead of just talking about it.
Are there exercises that you wouldn't mind sharing so folks have more of a substantive understanding?
Yeah. One of the ones that we did in the academy a week or two ago, during the academy, one of their assignments was to do a mock board presentation. I came up with this, actually, I think the TA came up with the hypothetical company that has a mental health therapy chatbot, and you're advising the board on the legal risks of this product. And so after they did those presentations, I had them try and distill it down into a skill file that you can use in Claude, and now I think at ChatGPT too. And I think that was, to me, that focuses on an important skill for lawyers in the age of AI, right? To be able to extract expertise from your head, from somebody else's head, and get it down, quote unquote, on paper in a way that can scale, right? You can then share that with your team or with another lawyer. So that's one. I've had them, in tools like Harvey, using the different features, using vaults and view tables. I created a GPT to simulate clients so they can practice interviewing clients and have them do things like that. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I love it. I'm sure they also benefit from your private practice experience and law firm ownership and GC experience, because you've also seen many of these situations and scenarios in real life with clients.
Yeah, I still practice a little bit on the side. Sometimes I regret that, but most of the time it's fine. There are only so many hours in the day. But it lets me keep current, right? It lets me try things out, seeing how well AI does on actual client work. And I think a big part of it is credibility. I think law students look at you a little bit differently, or give you a little more credibility when you have more significant practice experience.
Yeah, and when you've tried it, right, and you're still sort of in the current part of trying it. In that same vein, I think there's a lot of conversation around AI training, right, and lawyer development. I think for ages, we've had an ongoing dialogue between the theory-practice divide in law schools and who is responsible for creating practice-ready lawyers. I think AI has just accelerated and exacerbated that discussion. And so I'm wondering if you're in any conversations with legal employers, law firm employers who are thinking about the importance of AI as they recruit talent from law schools and trying to decide which law schools, right, do the best job preparing students.
Yeah, I've talked to firms that have told me, we decreased our class size, this year for incoming associates because we're anticipating AI doing more. And I think that naturally leads to, well, who are the ones who are still getting hired, right? And it's increasingly those who don't have their head in the sand, who can come in and say, in law school, I created some AI tool, right? And the tools are such that you don't have to have experience coding. You don't have to have a tech background. I don't have a tech background. I did Middle East studies for my undergrad. But the students who are able to do that, able to hit the ground running, who can, train themselves up to be a mid-level or senior associate faster than other law students, and those are the ones who are going to get hired.
Yeah, and I think law schools who take this seriously and who invest in existing technology in AI labs like the one that Vanderbilt has, right, or who focus on AI in legal writing, right, like New York Law School and Heidi Brown, who leads their advanced writing program. You have folks who, none of us knew how this product was going to work 3 years ago, but I think the schools who have leaders inside their administration and faculty who have started iterating early have put their students in a great position, because now their students can get the benefit of iteration and then really pull apart and analyze what should still be taught in a traditional manner, and at what point, and when do you make it hybrid, and when do you teach students to lean on the AI? Because as you and I learned in an analog fashion in law school, and so I don't think I can even imagine what it would be like to have AI in college or in law school, but there's still so much cognitively that we know needs to be learned the traditional way to then be able to verify and vet the AI that's doing it so that we meet our competency obligations with the bar.
Yeah, I think that's one of the trickiest problems right now for people who teach or train law students, future lawyers and lawyers, is figuring out which things can be learned with or alongside technology use and which things are kind of a predicate. Is this, you have to learn your times tables before you use the calculator, or is this like a compass? It's fine if you just use a GPS, really. You're probably not going to have to use a compass.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you had a magic wand and didn't have to deal with some of the bureaucratic elements of curricular development, are there things that you would add from an AI technology perspective as required courses if you could dream up a utopian law school?
Yeah, I think a utopian law school, it might be the case that it's integrated enough that you don't need separate classes, although I think maybe it would still, I don't know. Sometimes I imagine, what if you had a class that it was just a part of every semester in law school and it was about legal practice, and that could be applying the theories and methods that you learn in class to legal practice. It could be like management of a law practice. That's something most law students don't learn anything about until they're managing a law practice. It could include technology, but I think it really should be integrated wherever it makes sense, like in professional responsibility, especially in skills courses, extracurricular training opportunities like the ones we have here. Yeah, I think integrated is the way to go, so that it's not like, okay, I went to the training, I learned about AI, and now I don't need to think about it again.
That's a great magic wand answer. I feel like when ChatGPT came out, I was in a law school trying to get folks excited about it. And I was just delirious and delighted when I had faculty come to me and say, I've already tried to think through my syllabus and how I can use some of these tools to be thought partners, right? Or co-counsel, or to get in the mind frame of opposing counsel and the way that they would approach this. I mean, even to understand industries in a way that you wouldn't before, right? That isn't something that you necessarily even have the time or space to do in law school when you're trying to get the background understanding of a case or a matter or a dispute. And now we have that at our fingertips just to even get the architecture of the thing that you're trying to represent within, or the historical lens, right? Or the comparative lens, like who else is doing this. So there's so much opportunity. And I, with you, would love a world where more faculty would engage on this and simultaneously understand their hesitation and their desire to teach in a well-worn, trusted manner. I just think the profession has changed so drastically that not helping students get into the weeds of this and understand the governance and ethics implications and sort of their new role is hard to not do. I'm wondering if there are sort of additional professional skills that you're seeing that are coming along with this that maybe we didn't focus on as much in law school.
Yeah, I mentioned management. I think that kind of goes along with what we were discussing with design thinking, like being able to understand the resources that are available, whether it's technology tools, whether it's data, proprietary data that a law firm has, expertise of the different people. Being able to manage those is a really important skill. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about management lately, managers often have to supervise people who know more than they do in a particular area. Like a CEO is not, going to be the best marketer or the best engineer, And they have to kind of oversee all of that, even though they're not subject matter experts. And I think that will sometimes be the case with lawyers. It already is, right? Partners are not diving into the case law, at a big law firm, usually. And so you have to figure out how to manage and supervise something within your area of expertise. If AI is, giving you research, you have to take ownership of that and be able to back it up and check it. But we don't really train in that skill of managing when you are not the subject matter expert. And I think that's a hard thing. It takes one bad manager for you to realize how important management is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that systems thinking, but I think honestly, curiosity is one of the biggest things I emphasize, like just reading broadly within and outside of the law, listen to podcasts, not even just about technology. I read a book about the golden age of piracy recently. I don't know if it'll ever come up, but I have had, weird things make connections in my brain before. So who knows?
Yeah, and it is that sort of generalist problem solver mindset that I think is going to be so necessary. Having gone to Yale and been an administrator there, it's a very unique way of teaching. And I think I'm very grateful for that more of like holistic problem solving approach versus more traditional law school focused approach. And I think that it does us well to have a humanities based education to understand disciplines outside of just our direct professional one, because I agree with you, they're all interconnected. And I think thinking in a different lens, whether it's science or art, really helps come into relief the kind of problem that we're facing from a direction that maybe other lawyers who haven't had that broad gauge benefit had looked at in the first place.
So much of legal expertise is just pattern recognition, right? This is why a partner who's been around for 20 years, like they've seen so many cases or deals or whatever it is that they can see patterns, and that means they can predict what's going to happen or issues that might crop up. And reading outside of the law, just you learn to recognize different kinds of patterns in different areas that might show up in legal. And so it's just building those connections in your brain.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of folks, when they're looking at behavioral change and AI and the skills that are going to be needed, talk about discernment and judgment. And I think pattern recognition is a good deal of discernment and judgment and knowing when things go wrong, right? Or I've seen this before. This is what we should be wary of, because a lot of what we do is navigate uncertainty for people. So to the extent that we can reference previous cases in precedent, that's a piece of it, but also beginning to see behavioral patterns in companies or industries or individuals also helps us be able to be better guides and better supervisors.
Yeah, I mean, that's AI is pattern recognition and extrapolation, right? And that's why it's good, and that's why it's not good sometimes, right? Because it can do pattern recognition at a scale that we can't as humans, but also it's limited, by what it's seen. And so I think that's a good way of describing like what the role is of technology versus humans.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm jealous of your students, right? They get to have such a cool perspective from you that's not just technological and resource-based, but also very practical and connects to the impact of lawyering. And so we're at our time, but I have one final question I ask everybody at the end of the podcast, which is, what advice do you have for your former law school self?
Trust yourself. Law students don't know much about the law, even by the time they graduate. There's just so much to learn you couldn't. But I think learning to trust your future self. Maybe that's the advice. You are capable. You have a good brain. You can figure things out. Yeah, say yes to things, even if it will require some growth and learning on your part.
Such good advice. Thank you for joining us, Nick. I'm so grateful for the discussion.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to How to Navigate Law School with Anastasia Boyko, the podcast dedicated to guiding you through the hidden rules and practical skills essential for success in law school. For additional resources, visit PLI's Law School Hub at pli.edu/law school. Please note that the views and opinions expressed during this podcast represent those of the individuals being interviewed and not necessarily those of PLI. PLI is a nonprofit learning organization dedicated to keeping attorneys and other professionals at the forefront of knowledge and expertise.